Now we're on the eve of a big primary day in many states. Voters in 5 states, in fact, will be heading to the polls tomorrow. There will also be runoff elections in 2 other states, including the closely watched GOP primary in Mississippi between 6th-term Senator Thad Cochran and his Tea Party challenger, Chris McDaniel. Will the growing scandal over those lost IRS emails help the GOP in the midterms come November? Let's talk about it with Michael Warren, a staff writer for the Weekly Standard, and Ed O'Keefe, congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Right out of the box, Ed, there's not a lot of love in the country ever for the IRS. But if it turns out that the IRS was being used as a political tool of one party, is that going to inure to the benefit of the GOP?
It is, but remember, there's no hard proof that that has actually happened. You have lawmakers accusing the IRS of at least creating an appearance that they might be trying to help benefit one party or group of people over another, but there's no proof of that just yet. I think overall what this helps do, though, is helps Republicans in midterm elections leading up to the general election in November say to voters in swing districts or in those several states with competitive Senate races, look, the wheels are falling off the Obama presidency. You have problems at the IRS. You have problems at the VA. You have lingering questions about what happened in Benghazi back in 2012. You have problems now going on overseas in Iraq and Ukraine, and this president seems flat-footed. That's almost exactly what Speaker Boehner said last week to reporters. All of that will help. It all feeds a narrative Republicans are trying to create, that the Obama presidency is in trouble and that congressional Democrats are helping him, by not helping him necessarily in dealing with these problems.
Michael, how do you see it? Do the problems at the IRS, whatever their cause, do they help motivate Republican voters? Do they help perhaps propel Republican candidates?
Well, in the short term with tomorrow's primaries, I don't really see the IRS scandal playing a huge role unless somehow it turns out that Thad Cochran is actually Lois Lerner in disguise or something like that. Because the issue here is you've got a lot of deep red states and deep blue states holding their primaries. They're sort of low impact and maybe not have that much impact on what happens in November. The one thing I will be watching, however, is GOP primary turnout. Do a lot more voters, are they motivated maybe by something like the IRS scandal, maybe Iraq imploding, maybe Obamacare still? So if there's a sort of historic high in some of these low impact primaries, with Republican voters, that might bode well for the GOP in the future.
Yeah, and Ed, what about turnout? I mean, do these problems that we're talking about, the IRS, some of the other issues, do they motivate turnout?
Well, they not only motivate turnout potentially, but also intensity. We've been talking for months about polls that show higher intensity levels among Republican voters than Democratic voters leading up to the elections. And that's fueled partly because of the sort of 6-year lack of enthusiasm in a 2-term president. That's also driven a lot by what's been going on in Washington regarding all these different problems at different agencies. And Democrats, I think, a little fearful that they realize they're bumping up against a political reality that suggests that Republicans are going to win. But again, I think Michael's right. No lawmaker that's running in any of those races tomorrow has direct ties to the IRS, sits on the committees that have been looking at this, or has been in any way implicated or affected by some of the IRS's work. At least we have no proof of that at this point. You're going to see it turn on other issues. Down in Mississippi, Thad Cochran in the 11th hour is trying to make this a campaign about the fact that he has experience on military issues with the situation in Iraq imploding. In Maryland, where there's a primary in the Democratic primary for governor, there have been concerns about Obamacare and the fact that the state-run exchange had problems and that the Democratic lieutenant governor who's running for governor was partly responsible for that. Again, it'll contribute. It's part of one series of different problems that are driving voter disgust, and Republicans at least hope will drive voters to the polls.
And Michael, very quickly, what you do see happening on Capitol Hill is that Democrats are left in the maybe uncomfortable position of sort of defending the IRS over some pretty outrageous coincidences, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, you don't want to be on that side of a political argument. The IRS is pretty much universally loathed in the United States, but I think Republicans sort of have a difficult task here if they want to turn the IRS into a political benefit for them. They've got to make sort of a more holistic argument about the nature of politicized bureaucracies in the federal government. They want to say, okay, if you don't like what the IRS is doing, you don't like their attitude toward people trying to find out information, just wait until the federal government has all kinds of bureaucracies in something that actually touches you every single day, which is health care. So it's a really difficult argument to make. but I think that's the way Republicans do it. I think the jury's out about whether they have the political acumen to actually get away with it.
And the IRS set to be running the financial and record-keeping side of the Affordable Care Act. That'll be a joy. Thank you both. Ed O'Keefe, Michael Warren. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Take
John.
care, John.